Hello and welcome to episode 577 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan. As always, joined by Evan Silva, and we are careening toward peak fantasy football draft season. It's nearly July 4th already. Evan, how's it going today?
Yeah, it's going well. I think I saw today 72 days until week one. And we're going to be talking about a brand new 150. You know, I always make a super rough draft 150, like a couple days after I'm done doing draft grades after the draft. This one's for real. This one is all aligned with the tiers which have been rolling out. And I think that this is one that it's time to get serious, you know. And I've got, I think, about 20 drafts under my belt on Underdog, playing the Dalmatian and the Best Ball Mania. So, you know, I've got like legit skin in the game at this point, and I'm testing my rankings against where I'm willing to draft guys, and that gives me a level of confidence. The team previews will also start rolling out, and you know, I'll make adjustments as I do more research. But this 150 is going to be one that is kept up to date all the way through training camp.
Yeah, and all the stuff that Evan is describing right there is available in the draft kit right now. Be sure to check that out. As Evan said, on today's show, we're going to talk about the latest changes, or the changes he made since that rough draft of the 150. The biggest changes that he made for now, June Top 150, is up on the site, and why he made them. Going to continuously update that top 150 going forward. Once training camp hits, we'll get the change log going. Before we get into it today, again, reminder, Draft Kit Pro is officially live. It's $49.99, covers everything you need to win best ball, dynasty, or redraft league. Go to subscribe tab, check that out. We continue to roll out more and more content and context around our rankings for all formats. All right, let's get into it here with the top 150 rankings changes. I want to start at the top, Evan. And, you know, 4 spots is not a big move per se, but at the context of the top, it kind of is. You moved Cooper Kupp from number 8 overall in your original top 150. The one that came out yesterday, you have Cooper Kupp up to number 4 overall. Why the change on Cooper Kupp's ranking here in the first round?
I think I'm gaining a little bit more confidence in Matthew Stafford's health. Cooper Kupp, coming off a season that was really ruined by a high ankle sprain, he should be back to 100%. The target competition is almost non-existent for the Rams. I like Tyler Higbee right now as a top 12 tight end, obviously way further down the board, but Cooper Kupp should absolutely dominate targets this year. I don't think the Rams are going to be very good. We talked about when we had on Ryan Noonan and we were talking win totals, their defense is just like the island of misfit toys. They could be in a lot of shootout scenarios. And at the same time, up top, like, you know, what Christian McCaffrey is like 5, Austin Eckler is 6. It comes down to, you know, some personal preference in terms of like positions, because I mean, I usually could have put McCaffrey and Austin Eckler, I think, ahead of Cooper Kupp. But in this scenario, I went with 4 wide receivers to start off the top 150, and Cooper Kupp is number 4.
Yeah, I mean, all the reports out of OTAs on Matthew Stafford's arm and health are very, very, very good. Cooper Kupp, of course, coming off the ACL, but my God, I mean, 2021, he caught 145 balls for 1,947 yards and 16 touchdowns. He was backing that up to some degree last year before he got hurt. Only played 9 games, had 75 catches for 812 yards and 6 touchdowns in those 9 games. I think in a lot of my leagues, I try to go hero RB. And so if I have a choice between CMC and Kupp, I think it's really, really close. I don't mind going CMC there just to start off with that hero RB build that I like to do. But I certainly in a vacuum have no problem whatsoever with Kupp moving up to number 4. Let's talk about another guy up high moving up. That is Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard was 20th overall in your first 150. In the latest 150, Tony Pollard is up to 14th overall. I just want to say before you start here on Tony Pollard, Evan, we are still baking in projections in the back end. We are still baking in unlisted RB. In other words, we're still baking in some risk that Dallas signs some running back to complement Tony Pollard. And so that's why you see in kind of our top 300, Tony Pollard may not be as high as Evan has him, but man, there's some chance they don't sign anyone and Tony Pollard just goes completely nuke. So Evan, go ahead on how you're thinking about Tony Pollard and why you moved him up.
Yeah, so the Cowboys have not made that move that we are somewhat anticipating so far. And I think that the confidence level in Tony Pollard's recovery from his fibula injury has gone up. Right now, he looks like him and CeeDee Lamb are going to be the centerpieces of this offense. Going down the depth chart, Malik Davis, Deuce Vaughn, a 6th-round rookie, Rico Dowdle, Ronald Jones, again, rising confidence in the health of Tony Pollard, rising confidence in his workload projection. And I think that he's going to have, we saw this guy is an explosive, dynamic playmaker. They flipped that switch to him last year, and he ran with it. And I wasn't getting him when I had him ranked 20th. And now I got a chance to get him because I think he's going to end up as a fringe first-round pick. And that's where he is right now in the rankings at number 14 overall.
Yeah. I think the best landing spot for Ezekiel Elliott is actually Dallas, but he would have to swallow a ton of pride to come back there, take a huge pay cut, come back as some short yardage specialist behind Tony Pollard. But I do think there's some risk that he accepts that and does come back. But yeah, we'll see if he's willing to swallow his pride and do that. Regardless, I like being higher than market on Tony Pollard. Right now, his ADP on Underdog is 22. We have him 20th. Evan has him even higher at 14th in his personal rankings. And I want to be ahead on Tony Pollard. So I like that. One that surprised me, Evan, Travis Kelce was 11th overall in your first top 150. Now Travis Kelce is down to 16th overall. Nothing has really happened with the Chiefs per se. So explain to the people your thoughts on moving Travis Kelce down 5 spots into the second round here.
Well, he's turning 34 years old. And at some point, the age model is going to catch up with him. He wound up, I think he was my highest drafted player last year. We were banging Kelce in the first round, and then CeeDee Lamb in the second, and then Mahomes in the 4th round. That wound up working out really, really well. But I guess right now I'm kind of getting cold feet a little bit on Kelce because of the age situation. At some point it's going to run out for him. I still think that he's, I have him. I think I have him in his own tier in tight ends. Oh, I haven't published tight ends yet. I'm finishing that up right now, but I think he's in his own tier. He certainly is as it pertains to the rankings because he's up there well ahead of any other tight end. It's just, I don't know. I'm approaching him with a little bit more caution this year as he ages. I guess that's it's a simple answer. It's I don't know. Where would you have Travis Kelce right now?
Yeah, I'd have him higher because he's just shown no signs of slowing down. And the Chiefs have shown no concerns that he's slowing down. They have not done much to surround Patrick Mahomes with weapons beyond Kelce, And so if they think, well, listen, we're going to keep riding Travis Kelce for another 150 targets or whatever, 140, 150 targets, and they're okay with that, I guess I am too. I typically am going wide receiver where Travis Kelce goes, which is middle back end of round 1. His ADP is actually up to 6 on Underdog right now. There's a lot of positional scarcity stuff that shows value in Travis Kelce. I don't know, man. I've been beaten down by this guy on so many different fronts by writing him off too early on the age model stuff. Maybe I'm just beaten down, but yeah, I'd have him a little bit higher than you, but I clearly would take Jefferson, Chase, Hill, McCaffrey, Kupp ahead of Kelce. And then I would start to consider guys like Diggs and Eckler and AJ Brown, Bijan, guys like that, CeeDee Lamb ahead of Kelce. But.
Yeah, and really that's actually really what it came down to is that I'm straight up just I want to take the 15 guys that I have ranked ahead of them, Yeah. So, and I think that that's the best way to be transparent as a ranker and as someone who's out here drafting. I'm taking all those 15 guys ahead of Travis Kelce this year. I think we're going to do a man versus machine and have Leone on, and we'll talk about some guys that are difficult to rank. I would put Kelce at the top of that list.
Yeah. And one thing in the Travis Kelce conversation I think is important that's not in some of these other players' conversation is the rest of the position, right? How you feel about Kelce reflects how you feel the rest of the position. If you think that you can get, I don't know, Njoku and Freiermuth, the guys who we'll talk about later, and that's good enough for you at tight end because they're going to be somewhat close to Kelce, that makes it a whole different story. If Kelce's going to blow everybody out of the water again because tight end is total dust, well, that's another story and why you should have him higher. But we'll talk about that more when we do man versus machine. Fourth one I want to talk about is Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel up from number 35 in the initial to number 26 overall now. Deebo slips a lot late. And I was the most outspoken Deebo hater last year, completely out on Deebo. I've actually taken him a couple times this year when he slips, especially in touchdown heavy formats like it is on half PPR underdog. But talk to the people about moving Deebo up from 35 to 26.
Rising confidence in the health of Brock Purdy. I mean, at this point, I would say that there's almost a consensus among 49ers beat writers that Brock Purdy is going to be ready for week 1. And that was a legitimate question earlier in the offseason, coming off this UCL injury. I've been drafting a lot of Deebo. And I like the way that his skill set fits with Brock Purdy. Deebo was banged up a lot last year. He's got a lengthy injury history himself, but especially some, and I have to admit that I'm a little bit biased by, I'm drafting best ball teams, and Deebo is just as capable as any of the wide receivers ranked ahead of him of having monster spiked weeks. So some of that is factored in, but I think Brock Purdy is the perfect sort of distributor quarterback to get the ball to Deebo Samuel, who can dominate after the catch. And I'm willing to take him aggressively this year. I'm in on Deebo Samuel in 2023.
Yeah, my concern on 49er stuff is always that this team does not want to throw the ball at a very, very, very high rate. And I like CMC. I like Kittle. I like Deebo. I like Ayuk. It's just hard to see all those guys getting there in games. There's going to be, I think, some peaks and valleys with Deebo this year. But to Evan's point, I think the best ball stuff makes sense there on Deebo. Here's one I like that I think might be controversial. Kenneth Walker, you moved up from 37 to 31. Kenneth Walker's ADP, meanwhile, and I've talked about this on Market Monday a few times, or at least a couple of times, his ADP has been going down. It's going the other way. Evan's moving him up. The market has been going lower on Kenneth Walker. Evan has him up to 31 overall now. Kenneth Walker's ADP is 52. I have some Kenneth Walker thoughts of my own, Evan, but go ahead on Kenneth Walker and moving him all the way up to 31 overall.
Yeah, so I made a list of offenses that are maybe not, consider it's easy to say, all in on the Eagles this year. I made a list of offenses where it was not as obvious, and the Seahawks stood out to me. Going to be all in on the Seahawks. Love the complexion of their offense. I think they did really well on the draft. Geno, the luck never ran out for Geno last year. They signed him to the big extension. I know people are afraid of Zach Charbonnet, who the Seahawks took in the second round. You go back to last year when Rashad Penny was healthy, he was the dude. And then when he got hurt, Kenneth Walker was the dude. And I think that they're going to go into this season with Kenneth Walker as the dude and Zach Charbonnet as the clear number 2. If Kenneth Walker gets hurt, it'll be Charbonnet. But I think it's going to be Kenneth Walker to start. And I'm betting on this offense. I really like the line as well. And I don't know. I think the Seahawks are going to be good. And I think that Kenneth Walker showed that he can be really good. I know he was a little bit boom busty as a runner. But man, when he was at his peak, I mean, I thought he was really impressive in his first season.
Yeah, no problem. I think that the issue that people have is that the Seahawks used the number 51, I believe it was, overall pick on Zach Charbonnet. Do you do that and only give the guy the ball 4 or 5 times a game? That would be pretty idiotic, I think, but I would not put it past the boomerific Seahawks. My thing is that when people call Kenneth Walker boom bust, I don't really take that as a negative. Saquon Barkley is boom bust. I want guys on my fantasy team that can absolutely go for an 80-yard touchdown and rip it off. So in real life, I get why the Seahawks may be frustrated with Kenneth Walker. They don't think he's that great in the pass game. The boom bust stuff isn't that great. And that could lead to workload concerns. And so I think that's why the market has come off of him. Evan seems to be less worried about Charbonnet than the market is. I think I'd have personally Walker somewhere in between where the market is around 52 overall and where Evan is at 31 overall. I'd have it somewhere in between there because I do think that Charbonnet is going to play, especially on pass downs. But man, those big games from Walker, he's just such a talented dude. I want those kind of guys on my team. And Evan, you also moved Tyler Lockett up massively, 59 to 33. You already had a huge position on DK Metcalf ahead of market. Now Tyler Lockett also massively ahead of market here. And, I agree with you on we've talked about the Seahawks. I love the Seahawks offense this year. Also, defenses they're going to play. I mean, they're going to play Arizona twice. They're going to play the Rams twice. Those could be two of the worst defenses in the entire league. Go ahead on Tyler Lockett.
We've like made a living of being higher than market on Tyler Lockett for years. Now he's starting to age a little bit. This is going to be his age 31 season. They drafted Jackson Smith and Jigba in the first round, and I know that people are afraid about that. At the end of the day, like Tyler Lockett is really freaking good. And again, I'm pushing chips in on the Seahawks offense. And I think he's still going to be the clear number 2. I mean, you could make an argument that he's a more complete receiver than DK Metcalf, that he's the best receiver on the team. I'm investing in the Seahawks this year, and Tyler Lockett is a player that since I moved him up, like I'm getting him in like every underdog draft.
Right. Yeah. And again, people need to be aware of ADP. Like if you're using Evan's rankings when you draft, please be aware of ADP. And speaking of ADP, Evan, you realize now that since you've moved Lockett up and Jackson Smith and Jigba down, I mean, that's going to be your bet. You're going to be getting a ton of Lockett and not very much JSN at all because people are taking JSN, in like round 7 and stuff like that. So yeah, or higher. All right. Let's go to Miles Sanders. This is one I talked about on Market Monday yesterday. You guys can hear my take on Miles Sanders there. Evan moved Miles Sanders down from 44th overall to 54th overall. Evan, why drop Miles Sanders around in the rankings?
I think I've just, it's a simple answer, but I think I just had him too high earlier. I like him a lot better at 54, and he's still very often fairly high in my queue when I'm drafting. So I've got an opportunity to get him in most drafts, and I don't mind taking him at all. Let's look at this depth chart in Carolina because it's very unimpressive.
It's Chuba and Blackshear, Chuba has not played well in the past game.
Yeah, and Blackshear's like a preseason guy.
Yeah.
Spencer Brown, and then just a bunch of guys that nobody's ever heard of. I think that Miles Sanders has a clear path to being a workhorse in Carolina. I don't know how good the Panthers are going to be. They've got some talent on defense. They've got the new quarterback. I think Frank Reich is a good coach. I don't know. I like him at 54, and I didn't like him as much at 44. So that's the answer.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you're moving him down. Market's been coming down on him also. He's the one guy that like really scares me as a dead zone running back. I talked about this yesterday, but like the only thing that he really has going for him, in my opinion, is just like projectable volume. Like I think he's good player, not great. I think he was pumped up by the Eagles offensive and offensive line, but he does not have a lot of competition. He's going to get a lot of work. The team could be very bad though. I don't know. Miles Sanders is just one that scares me. There's just so many guys in that range that I prefer to Miles Sanders. But again, you can listen to Market Monday for more on that. I want to talk about the Broncos receivers, Evan. This has been a hot topic lately in the best ball streets. You moved Jerry Jeudy from number 51 overall to number 39. You moved Cortland Sutton, though, from 130 to unranked. Meanwhile, Marvin Mims' ADP has been going through the roof lately in the best ball streets. So maybe talk to people about how you're thinking about Broncos wideouts right now.
I'm betting on a breakout year for Jerry Jeudy. I'm betting that he stays healthy this year. They picked up his massive option. I thought that was good, especially under the new coaching staff. I thought that was promising. They tried to move Cortland Sutton. I still think that they might. And I dropped Cortland Sutton out of the 150 altogether. I don't want any part of him. Marvin Mims is a speed receiver who I think has drawn some comparisons to Brandon Cooks, who, of course, Sean Payton coached previously. Historically, though, those speed receivers under Sean Payton, they have not necessarily been volume guys. And I think that Jerry Jeudy can absolutely be a volume guy. To what extent do we trust Russell Wilson here? I think that that's a fair question. But I think that Jerry Jeudy is an absolute baller, and he's shown that when he's been healthy. He hasn't been healthy enough. But I think we're going to see that breakout year from him. And he's a guy who I've been drafting a lot of as well.
I mean, Denver's offense cannot be worse, right? I mean, they averaged 1.7 touchdowns per game last year, just like absolutely inept. I don't feel good about using a third or fourth round pick on Jerry Jeudy just because the systemic risk that the offense only gets a little bit better. But man, even once they got rid of, like, they made that late season firing of Nathaniel Hackett, and even just that sparked the offense over the final 2 weeks. Russ played much better. So I'm optimistic that with Payne in there, they'll get better. My take on Marvin Mims is, I mean, listen, they were on the record shopping or at least listening to offers on Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy all offseason. Then Sean Payton's first draft with the Broncos, they trade up. His first pick is a trade up for Marvin Mims. So I get it. It seems like they're in on him and they don't love Jerry Jeudy. They don't love Courtland Sutton very much. So I don't know. It's a tough one for sure. I like being low on Sutton though, the more that I've thought about it. And so Evan dropping him out
in the next version, I think I'm probably going to jam Marvin Mims at least into the top 150 because he's not in there right now. But I'm with you. I think you make a good case.
Okay. This one is going to raise some eyebrows, Evan. Alexander Mattison, you had 77 overall. That was when we were like 80%, 90% sure that Dalvin Cook was going to be cut. Now it's official. You have Alexander Mattison 24 overall. Alexander Mattison typically goes in the 50s in most drafts. So at 24 overall, you're going to be massively ahead on Alexander Mattison. I know we've talked about, and I've talked about Alexander Madison's situation a ton, but I give you the floor on this 24 overall ranking on Alexander Mattison.
Yeah, we have. We talk about it like every show. And I think that that's okay because he's the most interesting. I mean, this is the most interesting situation in fantasy football right now, I think. Dalvin Cook is gone. That dude was a half-decade mainstay in Minnesota, and they gave Alexander Mattison this almost fully guaranteed contract. I think and he weighs 225 pounds. He can catch passes, and his competition consists of Ty Chandler, a second-year, fifth-round pick, who I think, again, is interesting as a late-round pick, but, didn't barely played last year. And then Kenny Nwangwu, who is a special teamer, and then Dwayne McBride, who's a seventh-round rookie. So I bet I put this in the one-liners. I bet Alexander Mattison at 41 to lead the NFL in rushing. I think he could get 275 carries. I think he's built for that. Historically, these coaching staffs, although he hasn't been great himself, but these coaching staffs are willing to feed him volume. And I don't think that that's going to change this year. I think he's rarely going to come off the field as long as he stays healthy. He's a player that at this point, like, especially with where I have him newly ranked, he's like on like so many of my teams.
Yeah. And I think the case that people have against Mattison, they think that because he's not very good, because he's not very efficient, they say, which I don't know if I agree with. I think he is reasonably good. I understand that some of his big games when he started came against really bad defenses, but a lot of guys would not execute at that level. I think the concern is that because his efficiency has not been great in the past, he will lose work on certain game situations, could lose work later in the year. I just don't have a lot of faith in Chandler and McBride and Keeney. Just don't. And so I agree with Evan on the workload. From a structural perspective, I would not take Mattison 24th overall. I think he's okay as part of, especially in half PPR, as part of hero builds where you take him in round 5 or so as maybe like your first running back. You might have to start taking him in the 4th here if he starts to move up more. But yeah, I certainly prefer Alexander Mattison to Miles Sanders, to Dameon Pierce, to guys like that, but not at the same gap that Evan has it. So we'll definitely talk about Mattison again when we have Leone on here for the man versus machine episodes.
I've got Mattison up to in the season, the second tier among running backs, and he's my RB11 overall. So, he's a flag plant.
Speaking of the Dalvin Cook thing, we should talk about Devon Achane here for a second. Devon Achane's ADP has started to sink, I think because people were worried about Dalvin Cook signing and maybe some other stuff with Achane that they're not as confident that Achane's going to get as much base work. You've dropped Achane from 81st overall to 94th overall. Any thoughts on Achane now and the Dalvin Cook rumors?
This is not a result of the Dalvin Cook rumors because I just don't think it makes any sense for the Dolphins to sign Dalvin Cook. I think it makes sense for Dalvin Cook to want to play for the Dolphins. I mean, he's from Florida. You know, they've got a depth chart where he could, you know, probably immediately ascend to number one. But I mean, they've got backs. You know, they've got Mostert, they've got Jeff Wilson, and they used a third round pick on Devon Achane. I just think that it's likelier than not that this is going to be a three-man backfield. I think Devon Achane can absolutely have some big games. I just think that he belongs more toward that number 100 overall ranking than where I had him previously. I came out like guns blazing on Devon Achane. I was like, I'm going to make sure I'm ahead of ADP on him. I don't even care, you know. But then I start doing drafts and, you know, my head gets a little more level, and I like him better at 94 than when I had him at 81.
Yeah, I mean, he's going 120 overall right now, and I think some of that's due to the Dalvin Cook concerns, but certainly even at 100 overall or wherever, you're still going to get a ton of Devon Achane, which I still like. Let's go to the other Dolphins thing I wanted to ask about, just a small move, but Tua from 135, Tua Tagovailoa from 135 overall to 146 overall. I talked about him yesterday in Market Monday, but yeah, is this a positional thing moving him down, or is this any Tua takes that you might have for the people?
Well, I kind of moved all the quarterbacks down. Yeah. I think I just had him a little too high initially. So yeah, you'll see that like the quarterbacks got shifted down. Drafting quarterbacks can be very league specific based on your scoring, based on your personal preference. Hey, if you want to, you know, build your team around a stud quarterback, I get it. You know, that's been a strategy that's been actually working over the past couple of years. Tua is probably not that guy, although I think that, you know, as long as he stays healthy, and look, I mean, he's a severe injury risk at this point, right? I mean, the next concussion is like, let's hope he doesn't get another concussion. I'll put it that way. But he's not someone that I'm trying to aggressively draft, even though I think that when he's in there, I mean, there's so much speed. You got to love the scheme in Miami. But yeah, I mean, he's not someone that I'm aggressively drafting because of that injury risk.
Yeah. So I talked about this on Market Monday. You guys can go back and listen, but I think that in best ball specifically, if I'm taking Tua stacks, I'm betting that Tua stays healthy anyways, right? So like if he gets hurt or whatever, I'm totally dusted regardless. I already have Tyreek Hill. I already have Jalen Waddle. Maybe I have Achane or something also. Like I just need to bet on him staying healthy. And I don't know. I think there's a wider range of outcomes than Tua gets concussion, Tua's career is over. You know, like I feel like there's some stuff in there where a kid wants to play and he gets back on the field, and as horrible as that sounds, I don't know that it's as clear cut as if he gets another concussion, he's done, but we'll see. All right. Washington backfield's been making some noise. You moved Antonio Gibson up from 97 to 82. You moved Brian Robinson down from 107 to 110. So you have a big gap there now between Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson. Again, 82 to 110 is the gap there. What are your thoughts on Commanders backfield right now?
I think that Antonio Gibson is clearly a better talent than Brian Robinson. I think it's going to be a two-man backfield, and I think that that's reflected by the fact that neither of the guys are in the top 80 overall. But I think that Antonio Gibson just offers that upside in the middle rounds that and Brian Robinson doesn't offer that. You know, Antonio Gibson much better in the passing game, much more explosive. I like drafting Antonio Gibson right now where he goes because I think that ceiling is considerable.
Yes. Antonio Gibson has been moving up a bunch, but he's certainly been a target for me. He's up to 103 overall is Antonio Gibson. My concern is always that coaches love these like Brian Robinson types, you know, these like two down grinders. And a lot of times they don't like these Antonio Gibson types. And we've seen Antonio Gibson get benched. They desperately brought back J.D. McKissick last year and didn't give the job to Gibson. Now, obviously, McKissick is gone. I have like some queasiness that Gibson is not a coach's favorite, and Brian Robinson and they drafted Chris Rodriguez is, but clearly the role is there, at least on pass down. So specifically in full PPR formats, when you do that hero RB type build, you can get Gibson as the RB2, RB3, RB4 type, and he can get you 3 or 4 catches in a game. That's going to go a long, long way. So yeah, I think I prefer Antonio Gibson to Brian Robinson, but probably by not as much as Evan does. Dalton Kincaid has been dropped out of the top 150. There was so much excitement for Dalton Kincaid, and you only had him. You were not really part of that huge excitement. You only had him at 144 overall. He's since been dropped out now, and his ADP has actually been sinking like a stone lately. Meanwhile, we have all this Steph Diggs mess rumors. We have DeAndre Hopkins. Well, I don't think they're going to end up getting. But anyways, talk to people about dropping Dalton Kincaid out of the top 150.
Yeah, and he was barely in there before, as you mentioned. I think I had him at 144 overall.
Yeah.
He's a rookie tight end. There's another tight end in Buffalo that is established, and they gave a big extension to actually last September in Dawson Knox. There's an established number 1 receiver in Stephon Diggs. There's a player that, disappointed us a little bit in fantasy last year in Gabe Davis, but he's going to have a big role. There's a bunch of RBs. I mean, I think that Dalton Kincaid is a fun talent, and I think it was an exciting pick that the Bills took him in the first round. And, he goes to a pretty nice landing spot just in terms of quarterback play. But he's not a player that I feel like I can rely on as a fantasy starter. So he's going to be right around 150, I think. He might pop in. He might pop out at some point. I mean, it's not like I dumped him, in the rankings too bad. It's just I don't see him as a reliable fantasy starter as a rookie.
Yeah. And the bet is that he doesn't actually play tight end, that him and Knox are on the field together a ton, and Kincaid is the one detached from the line. And that's all the rhetoric that was coming out of the draft. That's still possible. I'm really curious to see how he's using the preseason. And obviously we'll be tracking all the preseason usage stuff come August. And I'm really curious to see exactly how Dalton Kincaid is used. All right, we'll wrap up here with a few ones that have moved a ton. Jakobi Mayers from 142 overall to 96 overall. Hunter Renfrow has not been traded yet. There's been speculation on both sides of that. Talk to the people about Jakobi going from 142 to 96.
I don't like this one. Sometimes you need to do more shuffling, and I don't like having him this high. I don't know. I might, after the show, just go back and drop him. You know what? Sometimes people make mistakes.
Well, listen, we're in the math-based and somewhat field-based rankings that we have for not Silva's rankings, but the rest of the staff. We're actually 20 spots ahead of ADP on Jakobi Mayers right now. And part of that is he's been quietly very good with New England. Underlying metrics have been very, very good that say Jakobi Mayers is a good receiver. Also, even if Hunter Renfrow stays, Jakobi Mayers was fine as an outside receiver. I like him better as a slot receiver, but even if Renfrow stays, I like him there. So when Jakobi Mayers goes around 120, I'm fine with him there. I'm not reaching ahead of ADP that much to get Jakobi Mayers, but I do think that he's going like slightly too late there at 120.
I think 120 would be perfect, and that's where I'm gonna put him.
Okay. Another one that moved up a ton, Jerrck McKinnon from 134 to 93. Obviously, he's back with Kansas City this year. Speaking of guys who are getting old, these old running backs who kind of rely on shiftiness scare me for sure. But McKinnon obviously had a big role last year for the Chiefs. What do you think about moving him up?
Yeah, this is another one that, when I hit the send button, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if he should be that high. He scored a ton of touchdowns last season. I think it's very unsustainable. They play him a lot, and he plays for the Chiefs. But I'm with you. I think that he probably belongs more in the 130 range. I like that you picked out these guys that I kind of cringed when I hit the send button. You found them, they stuck out like a sore thumb, but it's not a finished deal yet.
Here's the thing about Kansas City stuff. You're going to pay Kansas City tax and ADP on everybody in Kansas City. From a math-based perspective, it's really hard to get there on Kadarius Toney. It's really hard to get there on Jerrck McKinnon. It's really hard to get there on Sky Moore. I mean, Evan talks about his Travis Kelce concerns. It's even hard, I think, a little bit to get there on Patrick Mahomes, where he goes at 21 overall. You are paying an ADP tax on all Chiefs because they are the Chiefs, and everybody knows how good and consistent and explosive their offense is. So when you take a Chief, I think everybody just needs to be aware that you're paying a little bit of tax. That doesn't mean that you should avoid Chiefs because we're slightly below ADP on all these guys. You follow what I'm saying, because it's hard to figure out all the target shares and everything, but it's going to consolidate some. And like, man, I mean, you're going to have some big weeks from some of these guys. So certainly something to watch. Jamaal Williams up from 121 to 92. Close personal friend of the show, Jamaal Williams. I was actually featured last year on Jamaal Williams' Instagram story. For those guys who don't mention, for those who don't remember, for a tweet of mine, we're now close personal friends. But anyways, Jamaal Williams up from 121 to 92. Obviously, free agent pickup of the Saints this year. Go ahead on him.
So I think Alvin Kamara is going to face a suspension, sort of anticipating 4 to 6 games. And then Kendra Miller, there's been some negative rhetoric about Kendra Miller. I did not move Kendra Miller down yet. I think he's at 105 or something. I have him because I still think that everything can kind of work out for him. I love the player. I mean, the dude is an absolute baller. But there's been some negative rhetoric on him. And Jamaal Williams, again, you mentioned it with Brian Robinson. This is one of the players that coaches like to play because he doesn't put the ball on the ground, because he can pass protect, because he's going to get what's blocked. He's not going to get a whole lot more than that. But he's going to be super reliable. And I think he's going to end up with a good amount of touches. I mean, that's what Jamaal Williams does. He led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year. He's going to be reliable in short yardage at the goal line. In Green Bay, he always played a lot more than you kind of anticipated relative to his talent. I think he's going to end up, especially if Kamara gets a 6-game suspension, I think Jamaal Williams is probably the favorite to lead the Saints backfield in touches right now.
Yeah, we had moved a little bit of work. I mean, we were trying to be high on Kendra Miller, but we have moved a little bit of work from Kendra Miller over to Jamaal Williams at this point. And so, yeah, I think it's an interesting call. I don't typically take Jamaal Williams where he goes in that range there, but one thing I would say also about Jamaal Williams' touchdowns, not to take away from Evan's 100-to-1 hit last year, but there's so much variance and luck in football. How many times did someone on the Lions get knocked out at the 1-yard line last year? Like, it was incredible. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I was tilting my face off. Must have gotten knocked out of bounds at the 1-yard line like 6 times last year, and all of those end up going for Jamaal Williams touchdowns. And so, there's so much variance in touchdown scoring. And so that's one of the reasons that I've kind of been out on Jamaal, but I can't argue that, Alvin Kamara suspension and some whispers around Kendra Miller don't make me feel great. All right. Tight end. You moved up Pat Freiermuth from 113 to 91, which I thought was fine. I like Pat Freiermuth for sure. But at the same time, you moved David Njoku from 112 to 141 and Chig from 110 to 143. So some pretty big change of the tight end position there, Evan. Maybe give your thoughts to kind of that range at tight end, Freiermuth, Njoku, and Chig.
Well, for this, this second top 150, especially after doing the tiers, and the tight end tiers will be out within the next day. They'll be on the website. I want to make the 150 align with the tiers. And I think before I had these like sort of upside, tight end 10 through 14, that sort of range of tight ends, I had them a little too high. And I think that Njoku and Chig and some other guys, they fall into that category. So I wanted to have them at the end of the top 150 and make it like, aligned with the tiers. And so, sometimes that's just as a ranker, that's just kind of how it goes.
Okay, but why
the 150? You know what I mean?
But why wouldn't Njoku? I think the question is, why wouldn't Njoku and Chig be in the same tier as Freiermuth? I think is the question.
I like Freiermuth better. I have Freiermuth as tight end 9 overall, and then there's a drop off to the next tier.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Freiermuth is better than those other guys, and I like Njoku, and I like the idea of Chig, but I like Freiermuth better. I think that Freiermuth is not going to come off the field. I think that there are scenarios where he could score a bunch of touchdowns, and there's also a scenario where Kenny Pickett like takes a little bit of a leap, and Freiermuth is his dude, especially in scoring position.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I would have Freiermuth first of those guys, then Njoku, then Chig. I don't know if that I'd have them in separate tiers. I'd probably have Chig a tier below, but I'd probably have Njoku and Freiermuth in the same tier. Maybe I'm just like a sucker for Njoku's freak athletic ability. And I am still worried they signed DeAndre Hopkins, which would give them just so many mouths to feed in the pass game. But I do like being high on Njoku a little bit. And yeah, on the Freiermuth, I like being high on Freiermuth, man. I think actually that the receivers are overrated. Like I think George Pickens is overrated. I think Deontay Johnson is overrated. And Pat Freiermuth is a touchdown scorer. And I think that he is probably my favorite of the group. So I definitely agree with you there. All right. Last one, Anthony Richardson from 75 overall to 120 overall. This is tough. I mean, obviously the ceiling case is that Anthony Richardson turns out to be the next Jalen Hurts. I don't think anyone is expecting that from a passing perspective in year one or maybe ever. But yeah, it's a big dump down for Anthony Richardson. Go ahead on him.
Again, all the quarterbacks moved down in this 150. 75 was too high for him to have him smacked down. I mean, that's what, like a freaking 6th or 7th round pick. I had him way too high in the initial rough draft. And I think that he is, actually I've drafted him a decent amount. I think he's a high upside late round quarterback. And I think that it's much more appropriate to have him at 120. 75 was kind of ridiculous.
I mean, the problem is I never get Anthony Richardson, and I like Anthony Richardson. I just never get him. People love drafting this guy. I mean, he's been going, his ADP on Underdog right now is 98th overall. I mean, people love, and I think casuals who had a lot of hate for Anthony Richardson during the draft process may drive that ADP down when we get more towards August. So like, I'm kind of biding my time. I think my time to get Anthony Richardson shares will probably be later, August, September type times.
I also think that there is some risk for Anthony Richardson that, we went through this with the Trey Lance, Justin Fields year where, and look, I love that Shane Steichen came out and said, hey, we're going to let him take his lumps. We're going to play him right away. Basically I still think that there is a chance that they don't open the season with Anthony Richardson as a starter. And maybe it takes him 3, 4, 5 weeks. And, you would prefer to have your your quarterback that you drafted in your fantasy draft out there in week 1, as opposed to occupying a roster spot like what happened with Trey Lance and Justin Fields a couple years ago.
100%. All right. You can view Evan's full top 150 on the site right now. The tiers are also up, as Evan has been alluding to. That's all part of the draft kit. Be sure to check that out. We'll be back later this week with Thorman to talk about pace. And this is like so important when you're thinking about teams and projections. How fast will a team play? And most importantly, who will change a lot off of last year? Thorman is the expert in that. He will be here on, we're recording tomorrow. We should have that up by Thursday. So stay tuned for that. All right. For Evan, for producer Luke, for the most beautiful beast in the world, Jerry, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.